Hello, good evening, happy Tuesday. Yep, it looks like the sound is good. Hello, welcome to Live with Gotham Quilts. It is Tuesday. Hello, Barbara from Southern California. I hope you are getting some fabulous weather, as we know that you are wont to do in Southern California. Wherever you're from, whether you're watching us live or on the replay, just say hello in the chat. We love to know where you are from, where you're watching us from. So I am Allison. If this is the first time you're joining us on a live with Gotham Quilts, you have picked a really good one to start out with. I'm Allison, and behind the camera, making all the magic happen, is producer Ken. And we've got a show today that I hope will break you maybe just a little bit outside of your comfort zone. We are talking all about texture in quilts. And we lean a little more modern. Our Gotham friends are a little more modern as far as quilting goes. And so, modern quilts, as a general rule, there's modern quilts. I feel like the way that it's described is you kind of know it when you see it. There are certain things that make something feel a little bit more modern. And I'm going to tell a little bit of a side story, and then we'll get into the topic of the conversation. But just recently, our sister shop, Tiny Apple Fabric and Crafts in Anoka, was invited to be a vendor at a local quilt show. And they do this every other year. The members submit their quilts for judging. They give away fabulous prizes, and we were just so honored to be able to vend at the Maple Grove Quilt Show. And one of the benefits of this is we're in the building anyway, so we get to browse around and look at all these beautiful quilts. And first of all, one of the things that we noticed this year is there were some amazing quilts this year. There are every year, but I think the folks of the Maple Grove Quilt Guild just kind of outdid themselves. But one of the things that I took special note of is I saw a lot more modern or leaning modern quilts than I have in years past. So it's not just a trend, folks. This is modern quilting is here to stay for sure. So just wanted to give a shout out to our friends out in Maple Grove and say I can't think of a better time to bring up this particular topic, and that is the topic of texture in quilts. So the name of our show today is Can You Quilt With That? And spoiler alert, the answer is going to be yes, and we're going to help you do it. And hey, Raquella, welcome from New Jersey. So, we're going to talk about a couple of fabrics that we see most often that aren't strictly regular quilting cotton. And the reason that it makes such a difference in modern quilting is that there's one of the things that's kind of a guiding light, guiding principle is there's a lot more negative space, a lot more background in modern quilts than you'd see in just your traditional quilts. And so when you have that much of something, you want to make it count, right? If you're going to have a lot of background, you want to give it as much texture as you can while still being background and not detracting too much from the main parts of your quilt. The other thing is with quilting cotton, it's all the same texture. It's flat, it's smooth. And when every when every fabric in your quilt has the same hand, the same texture, you really are relying on and making things like the print or the color do a lot of heavy lifting. When you add in some different textures, you're taking some of the pressure off of those fabrics. And so you see a lot in modern quilting of solids, for example, where, maybe in a traditional quilt with some of that traditional piecing, the solids haven't been as popular. You see more of the texture and the print to bring some interest. With these textured fabrics that I'm going to go through, from all the way from very similar to quilting cotton to very different from quilting cotton, when you bring in that spectrum of fabrics to your quilt, you're letting the texture of the fabric do some of that heavy lifting. Now, I know what you might be saying. And hello, I love your name, Princess Roblox from North Carolina. It's good to see you here. I know what you're thinking, right? Texture's hard. Texture adds a little bit of complexity that, you know, that you're a little worried about it. And I want to tell you, it is not as scary as it sounds. There are just a few things you need to know about how fabrics might behave a little different, or take a listen to our helpful tips and tricks. Learn from what we've learned the hard way, and you too can bring some extra texture into your quilt. So, I mentioned that there's a whole spectrum, and I'm going to start off with the fabric that is most similar to quilting cotton, and that's going to be something like this yarn dyed fabric here. Now I've got we'll do the overhead in just a second here, but this one I would say is the most similar to quilting cotton, and that's going to be the yarn dyed fabric by Artisan Cottons by Windham for Windham. Now, with this, here we go. Yep. With this, the reason that I say this is the most similar to regular quilting cotton is because it's got a very similar weight to it as quilting cotton. But how it's made is just a little bit different. Let's bring that guy up there. Oh, I think we'll go back to how we were because it was just kind of a little picture. There we go. So how it's made is a little bit different. Now, regular quilting cotton, I'm sure you're very aware, it's a woven fabric, and then there is a color, generally a color or a printing on that fabric, which is why when you're looking at a regular printed cotton, one side is obviously the right side, and one side is obviously the wrong side. With a woven cotton, yarn dyed cotton, the right side and the wrong side are not so easy to tell apart. So you can tell from this fabric here, I'm going to get my pulled out corner. I'll tell you why I did that in just a second. You can tell from this fabric that the right side and the wrong side are all really very similar. When you're looking at this, you can't tell which one is which. The reason it looks like that is because if you go back to quilting 101 here, or fabric 101, when something is woven, you have a warp fabric and you have a weft fabric. And so those are crossed together to make the weave. In this particular fabric, you can see, because I kind of started teasing it apart in the corner here, you can see that one fabric is this light brown, a copper, I think it's called, and one yarn is this dark one. So the dark one is going along with the length of fabric, and the light color is going with the width of fabric. And together, you can see the different colors here in the corner. Together, when they come together, they make this beautiful, very textured brown color. And Barbara asks, is that similar to shot cotton? And yes, it is. And shot cotton, I think of as more of a lighter weight. And I'll get to a fabric that's very, very similar. So if you're thinking like maybe like a Cafe shot cotton, I'll find something here that's a very similar weight. But this one I started with because although it's made like a shot cotton, where you got your warp and your weft, and they are different thread colors put together to make one beautiful, vibrant color. This one in the Artisan Cotton, the threads are quite a bit thicker. They're more what you'd see of with a quilting cotton. And so this one, although it looks different, it feels a lot like regular quilting cotton. Now I'm going to scooch this over to a little area, and I hope this shows up okay on camera. But what I'm seeing here is you can kind of see some variation, maybe like right where my finger is, you see kind of a bigger, we'll call it a blob, I guess, a little slub of the lighter color. That's one of the appeals of the Artisan Cotton from Windham as well, is that you've got a little bit of an irregular texture in the threads that are woven together to make this. So not only is it a heavier feel, but it also has those little texture bits right where my finger is there, and there's another one right there, so that will provide some texture as well. Now that kind of brings us to the next one, and this one is a Crossweave by Moda. If you're thinking of a shot cotton by Cafe, this is kind of what I'm thinking of here. The shot cotton, I would say, is even a little bit lighter than the Crossweave by Moda, but they're very, very similar feels. And then, of course, you're going to have the difference in colors of the actual threads of the the yarns that are used to dye this. And so you can see that when this is laid out here, it kind of has almost a shimmer to it. This is the same thing. This one, the fabrics, or I'm sorry, the threads are like a darker green and a lighter green. That's another thing about these yarn dyed fabrics is the farther apart those two colors are, the more striking the difference you're going to get, the more shimmer you're going to get. And I say shimmer like very gently. It's not like a metallic shimmer. Spoiler alert, we're going to get to that later. It's more of a shifting in colors. So in this particular fabric, the colors that are shifted are really very similar. We've got a dark green and a light green, and together they make this. So I'm going to just kind of tease apart some of this here. And so you can see, I'll put it on the white here. You can see the different colors, that this is really like a, I don't know, we'd call it like a forest green. And then the little ones here are just a light Kelly green. And so that is the Moda Crossweave. Same ideas before. You're taking two beautiful colored threads and weaving them together to make this. Now this is kind of light, kind of flowy. You can kind of see from when I'm moving it around. Now I've got one more yarn dyed fabric that is going to be completely, well, a lot different from these two. Made in very much the same way. You've got your warp and your weft in your different colors, and this is a space dye by Figo. So we're starting off the same way. You've got different warp and different weft colors, but what they've done in this one is to add a little bit of texture. They've used different colors. So instead of one color all throughout the fabric, they've used different colors, which gives it this kind of stripy effect. Now, this fabric does really well when it is given lots of space to breathe, so lots of background. You're just going to let the texture of this fabric be the star. And this one is the lightest, I would say, to work with. Of the three that we've got here, this one is the lightest, the loosest, and also, like, well, what am I trying to say here? I'll put it this way. It could definitely benefit from a little starch, which kind of brings me to the next point is, how do you work with these fabrics? Can you bring them in with regular quilting cotton? And the answer is yes. For all of these fabrics that I'm going to talk about today, you can absolutely mix them with regular quilting cottons. You just might want to take note of just some special treatments, and we're going to give you all those to make sure that we're going to set you up for success if you decide to bring any of these into your quilting room. Now, these are all when we're going to take all of the ones that we just looked at together, the Figo space dye, and all of these are available in a ton of other colors as well. We're also going to talk about the Moda Crossweave, and then that Artisan Cotton. All of these are going to behave very similarly. You just want to pick the right one. And yeah, my mom is watching tonight, and so Liz did mention butterfly wings. We like to call the space dye up here butterfly wings because it has a very, very soft hand. But that could actually be a feature and not necessarily a bug. So with those, they're all really very easy to sew with because they are really quite similar to quilting cotton. With all of these, but especially that space dye here, the color can be directional because keep in mind, all of the threads going this way are one color and all of the threads going that way are another color. And so cutting your fabric in the same direction or being mindful of the grain is really very helpful. You can press them like normal. They have a really good heat tolerance, but the lighter the fabric, you might want to consider starching it using something like Best Press or an acorn treatment to get these fabrics up to the same hand as the other fabrics that you're working with in your project. So if you're mixing the space dye, for example, with a regular quilting cotton, you definitely want to give it some starch so that you get that hand up to where it needs to be to match your other fabrics. It's just a little bit easier to sew with that way. Now with these fabrics, you don't need anything special. Your standard quilting needle will work just fine. You don't need a special presser foot. You can press them as normal. So this one, if you're looking to dip your toe into some of the other fabrics in the texture world, these are a great, great starting off point. Now, let's see where we're going next. So we talked about the space dye. Let's talk about something even a little more different. So we're going to put those kind of shot cotton yarn dyes away, and I'm going to bring up something kind of similar. This one is a yarn dye, but it's a yarn dye with a very specific design. This one is a plaid, and I'll show you the overhead here, but I just want to show you how beautiful using the dyed yarns to make a plaid can be. Now, the fabulous thing about this is when you're looking at this yarn dyed plaid, you're probably thinking, wow, that's a really nice, luxurious plaid. And when you're getting it printed on fabric, they have some really nice plaids out there, but it never quite looks exactly the same. The lovely thing about this is because the plaid is made with the yarn, with the threads here, you know that your plaid is going to be completely straight on grain. You're not going to have to worry about the grain of the fabric not matching up with the printing of the plaid. It's everything you need right here. The other thing that you'll notice about this is much like the fabrics that we talked about earlier, because this is woven, because the design is woven into the fabric by the threads, there's not really a front or a back or a wrong or a right side here. Um, and Kim brings up a super great point that we are going to especially point out with some of the later fabrics is that these fabrics, because they're in general more pliable, that it's really easy to do bias strips, curves, any of that thing where you need just a little bit more flexibility. These fabrics are going to play super nice with that. And so, Kim, thank you for bringing that up. That's a fabulous point. So the plaid yarn dyes are really just a very lovely, luxurious, rich looking kind of plaid. Now, the other thing that you'll see, and that's kind of like the true benefit of a plaid, is you are getting those colors in between. So when you've got colors that cross each other, it makes a third color because you've got, just like we saw in a big piece here, where we've got the dark and the light that kind of make a brown, you're getting that naturally and on kind of a smaller scale but more repetitive. Every time these threads cross each other, it makes a third color in that plaid. So I think that's one of the reasons why it looks really very nice and luxurious, because you've got all that variation of color that just happens naturally when you're using the threads woven into something fabulous. Now, we talked a little bit about the plaid and how nicely this lines up on the grain because the plaid is built into the threads. One thing to keep in mind is anytime you want to match your plaids across your seams, be sure to add extra yardage and plan those cuts before you actually make them. That one is a little bit more of an intermediate skill, but intentionally not matching your plaids is very cool and modern as well. So simply, just in a lot of things that we do, sometimes you have to embrace the imperfection, and sometimes making things that don't match up exactly are even more interesting to look at than things that are perfectly matched. Although there's a certain amount of appreciation in that skill for sure. With this one, there's not really a whole lot of sewing notes I have for it. This one is going to behave very similar to the yarn dyed, the crossweave that we were talking about earlier, and that you can use your regular pressing foot, your regular needle. With this one, though, because it is a little bit of a looser weave, be careful when you're pulling on the bias, for example. It's a little more relaxed than a regular quilting cotton, so just be a little more careful with it. That's all you need to worry about. Let's see here. We can go to this one, and I think I know where I'm going to go next. Okay, so we've talked about some yarn dyed, and this is a yarn dyed as well, but this is more of like a date night yarn dyed. And this is a metallic, and you can kind of see that glimmer here. This one is a yarn dyed fabric, and I'm definitely going to show you on the overhead, but I want you to see that shimmer too. This is a yarn dyed fabric with threads of metallic running through the fabric. So that metallic shimmer is actually in the fabric. We talked earlier about the artisan cotton, or when you have a great difference in the thread colors of your warp and your weft, you get more shimmer. That's more of a figurative shimmer. This one is a literal shimmer. So in this particular fabric, there we go. There we go. I'm going to get some of the white here on screen, so hopefully that color will come through. This is if you're thinking, and I gave you a little sneak peek of what's to come here. This one, if you're thinking of it, is well, what was I talking about? Oh, we've got metallic thread. So this one, it probably is going to be where you want to take a little more care into how you treat this fabric. The other ones were more or less like quilting cotton. There were a little few concerns. This one is, I would say, best used in small doses. You could make a quilt all out of shimmer, which would be a look in and of itself. But this one, I think, does best in little bits. So the fabric makeup of this is going to be probably the only, no, we'll get to the end, but this is going to be probably the most different from the ones we've talked about already. This one is 92% cotton, 3% polyester, and 5% lurex, which are these threads that flow through it that give it that shimmer. This is in the color champagne. So as you're looking on your screen, it shows up a little bit darker than it actually is in real life. This is like a true champagne color, but it's got a great flow to it, and it's got a great shimmer. Oh, look at that. Look at that color. I will also say on the back, and this is, you can kind of see it as the light pulls through on this little bump here, is that there's, much like the artisan cotton, it's got some slub to it. It's got some texture just in and of itself. So the metallic shimmer, that lurex, isn't the only thing that's different about this. It has some texture just in and of itself. So even when that shimmer is not being hit by the light, you still have something really interesting to look at. So this one probably is going to take some notes. So I do have some sewing notes on this one. With this guy, you will want to use a sharp needle. And as we're talking, I'll just kind of pull out some of the threads here so you can see how this is coming together. But you can see we're alternating with, you know, what you'd think of as regular cotton threads, also with this lurex, so those shiny ones right there. And that is where that shimmer comes from, and that they are actually woven into the fabric. So because you have these little metallic pieces, using a sharp needle, a microtex or a universal sharp needle is the way to go. In addition, when you're sewing with something like this, I would definitely recommend upping your stitch length just a bit, around 2.5, maybe even just shy of 3 would be great with this, because every time you poke through one of these threads, you want to do your best to just, I guess, minimize the number of pokes that you're putting into this particular fabric, or maybe like penetrations is a better way to put it. With this one, you want to stay away from steam. Press with a dry iron on a medium-low setting, so not all the way up on cotton, just dial it back a little bit. There is a little bit of polyester in here and that lurex, so you do want to give that a little bit of a break, and you want to just be a little conscious of those lurex fibers there. And then cut carefully and minimize the handling. These threads, you can see how easy they came out, but once you cut your pieces, if you're not actively pulling on the fabric, you should be fine. But like any woven fabric, you might, if you cut it and don't sew it for a while, you might end up with some strings. If that is the case, as you get your pieces, you can just use your rotary cutter to just trim up the ends, use those to cut off those little bits there. Now, as I said before, this one is best used sparingly. It's the cherry on the sundae. You probably don't want a whole sundae full of this ice cream because that would be a lot of shimmer. Although, I don't know, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a handful of different colors of this. So, having an all shimmer quilt, I wouldn't say no to it. That's for sure. Now, I'm gonna show you the one that probably I think it started this whole thing, and it's good that I've got a big picture behind me because it is the quilt behind me that started this whole conversation about texture, and that is a linen or a linen blend. Now, this one is probably I think we've had the most questions on linen, especially with the show and tell quilt behind me. Elizabeth Hartman, the designer of the pattern, so this is a show and tell pattern by Elizabeth Hartman, is a huge proponent, just a huge fan of using linen blends as backgrounds, right? For exactly the reasons we talked about at the top of this show, is that it gives you a lot of texture without a lot of distracting, without a lot of color, without a lot of pattern, just a lot of subtle texture. It makes your quilts more interesting. And this could cut both ways, but also more touchable. And what better compliment is there than someone who just wants to get up and cuddle up and touch your quilt, right? But like I say, at the quilt show, that could probably cut both ways. But here, let's talk about the linen here. Now, linen, as I'm sure you're aware, is one of the oldest textiles in the world. It's made from the flax plant, and it's one of those things. Like I feel like I was listening to podcast or something on linen the other day, and we're going all the way back to the ancient Egyptians using linens, and those linens look just as lovely today as I'm sure they did when they were first made. Linen is fabulous. It's one of the few fabrics that gets better and softer and nicer looking the more that you wash it. Washing linen actually does it good. Which brings me to, I'll tell you about linen, and then we'll go to the sewing tips. How about that? So this one here has a canvas weight body to it. We've got a handful of other linens that go all the way from, a heavy canvas to a light canvas, which is almost almost like quilting cotton. When I'm looking at this one is actually on the lighter side, closer to quilting cotton. So it makes it a great entry point, a great jumping off point to add this into your quilts or your projects. And so these are great for projects like that. Now, one thing that, if there's anything that people know about linen, is that it wrinkles famously. And so you can see even me just scrunching this has wrinkled it, I would say probably a lot more than a similar weight quilting cotton. You can kind of see my scrunched corner there. This one is, we've got a bunch in the shop. I believe I grabbed the one that's probably like 50-50 or 55-45 of linen and cotton. So it still has quite a bit of cotton in it, which is why it feels so flowy and not as scratchy as you might think a traditional linen would be. So in this case, this is one of the very few times where I would recommend to you to pre-wash your fabric. Now, linen is going to fray, so I would take your big piece of yardage before you cut it down, make a stitch, serge it around the edges, whatever you need to do. Zigzag is a great way to do that, just so you don't lose too much of that just to the normal washing. But throw this guy in the wash because it is going to shrink, and you want it to shrink as much as you can before you put it into your quilt, where you're going to have other fabrics that are going to shrink at different rates. So this is the one time where I would recommend pre-washing your fabric. Generally, I'm not a big fan. So the other thing is that linen frays quite a bit. It's a little bit of a looser weave, and so you do have some fraying. This is another example where starch would help prevent that fraying. Another time where cutting right before you're ready to sew is a great option too, so you don't have these pieces sitting around and getting handled. But just like before, if you cut your pieces and they end up getting some fraying on them, just take your rotary cutter and just zip around to get those loose threads off. And oh, what a great question about hand loom by Windham Fabric. Yes, we have seen the fabric. Another boy, this show is filled with spoiler alerts. I hope you guys are ready. But spoiler alert, we do have that on order. I believe that's coming later this summer. And a further spoiler alert, if you guys are a big fan of QuiltCon, what I do know is that there will be a challenge hosted by Windham Fabric using the hand loom color. Now, as far as I'm aware, the colors have not been selected yet, but I do know that there will be a competition with using the hand loom colors. It'll be very similar if you remember the competition from from this QuiltCon that just most recently happened. That was the Artisan Cotton. They picked out 5 or 6 colors. You had to use those 5 or 6 colors and no other colors. You didn't have to use all of them, but you couldn't use any other ones to make a project that was, subject to being judged at QuiltCon. And so I looked at the winners just a couple nights ago, and they were really very, very pretty. But in any event, so the hand loom is a woven product. It's got a little bit more texture than the ones that we're talking about here. It is gorgeous. The colors are beautiful. We're getting the whole collection in, and so that should be in the shop relatively shortly. But do keep that in mind. If you are interested in sewing something up for QuiltCon, there is going to be a contest for the hand loom fabrics. So that'll be kind of fun and lovely. But back to the one that we were talking about today, and this is the linen. We talked about the fraying, so cut your pieces right before you're ready to sew them. What a great excuse to just say, I can't do anything. I have to sew my linen. And feel free to use that excuse if you want to. The last thing that I will say is that linen doesn't love being pulled on the bias, so this isn't quite the bias, but it's got some stretch to it. So just be careful to cut your fabric on the grain as much as you can and don't tug on it too much. Now, for this one, I wouldn't say you need a special needle to sew with linen. A sharp needle is great because you are dealing with a heavier fabric. That is where you're going to up your needle size a little bit. An 80 or a 90 would be just perfect for something like this. An 80, I think, would be lovely. When you get to those heavier blends, the 90 works great too. You don't need any special presser foot, like you don't need a Teflon foot or a walking foot or anything, especially if you're using one of the lighter linen blends. But you will want to up your stitch length just a bit. 2.5, just under 3 would be a great one too. Now, your linen is going to appreciate a super hot iron. So do keep that in mind. And another thing is you might want to consider pressing open your seams, pressing them open if you can, just to reduce bulk, because this is, no matter what linen you choose, it's going to be probably a little bit thicker than a lot of the quilting cottons out there. And so this is a great stepping off point because it blends so well. So if you're thinking of this linen colored linen, it blends so well with solids, with textures, as you can see with that quilt behind me. And that the linen background gives it just enough interest, but it lets those colors pop, those solids pop. So that is linen. Now, we're going to go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum here. We talked about linen, which is a little bit heavier, kind of like those really nice jeans that make you look really good. And we're going to go to the other side. So if linen is like the jeans, it's the rugged, this is going to be that silk blouse. And you know what I'm talking about. I didn't get it quite in frame here. I'm talking about cotton lawn. So cotton lawn is another fabulous fabric. If you are familiar with like Liberty of London, for example, that is the #1 game in the cotton lawn weight fabric. There are lots of fabric manufacturers that are coming out with all kinds of fabulous designs and then additions to their current designs on the cotton lawn substrate, I guess we'll call it, to use that. Cotton lawn is a softer, flowier hand. And let me get this out. I cut a big piece to make something fabulous, but you can see just how flowy that is. Let me do this here. You can see just how flowy and lovely and fabulous this is. So with the cotton lawn, it is great for, I've heard it used for backings because it's really nice and soft and wonderful. So you could use it for that, absolutely. You see it a lot in English paper piecing. As Kim talked about before, some of these nice flowy fabrics go around curves beautifully, which makes it lovely for English paper piecing. It wraps around those paper pieces so fabulously. The curves are just a dream in the cotton lawn. It's so flexible and lovely and fabulous. And there are a lot of really great ones. If you are looking to dip your toe into garment making, I can't think of a better blouse than this. So cotton lawn, fabulously soft. It's fabulously wonderful to work with, but it does have a different drape than regular quilting cotton. And so when you are working with it, just keep in mind what it is and what quilters love about it. And that is the flowiness, kind of floaty quality. So with this, a couple of sewing notes with the cotton lawn. Definitely consider pre-washing this in cold water in a very gentle cycle. It can shrink a little bit, and so you want to get that out of the way before you actually start cutting or sewing. You could also consider putting it in something like this, like a little garment bag. Just put your whole yardage in there, and then that way it'll keep it nice and together. You don't want to stuff this bag too full, but just like this fit. This is a yard of fabric, and I could have probably fit 2 or 3 in this bag here. So it's just a great way to keep it all together. When you do wash your cotton lawn, especially this, but this applies to anything that you're pre-washing, do consider taking it out just before it's fully dry and do the pressing that way. That way you can use a little bit of that residual moisture to release the wrinkles. And then you're also not leaving it in the dryer to set certain wrinkles, and then it's even harder to get it out when you press it. So do consider taking it out just before it's fully dry and do your pressing. With cotton lawn, you could also, or you should also consider cutting it in one layer. One of the great things that hand and that drape, the feel of it, it's a little bit slippery. So when you're stacking it up together, sometimes that fabric can slip and would make your cutting less accurate. So do consider cutting it in one single layer whenever you can. And then for this one, everything we've said is to up your stitch length and to get a bigger needle. This, we're going the other way. So a microtex needle is great to work with this. Something super sharp and brand new is ideal. 70, size 70 needle is great. And then for this one, you want to drop your stitch length just a little bit. So if you're thinking about it, it really does make a lot of sense. If you're doing bigger, bulkier things, make that stitch length bigger. If you're doing nicer, finer things, or I guess nicer, they're all nice. If you're doing softer, finer things, lower that stitch length. And for this one, just because of the flowiness of it too, you could consider starting with a leader for sure. You could also even consider putting like a little piece of tissue paper to give that first bit underneath your sewing machine a little bit of heft, a little bit of something for your sewing machine to grip onto if you're worried about your machine sucking the fabric back in. So give it a little bit of tissue paper. You can just tear that off after you've got the seam, or you can also hold your tails when you're doing that. Just give it a little bit of help when you're working with something this fine and soft. Let's see here. Okay, so we talked about that. Now, This one is, it's so very lovely. You definitely want to press as you go. Give it a little bit of a break with your iron. You don't want super, super hot, like the silk setting. If you've got a silk setting on your iron, would be perfect for this, even though this is 100% cotton. Just give it a little bit of care with that one. Um, so this is a great question. So the Kaffe wide backs are not technically lawn. It's not a cotton lawn. It is on the sateen side. So I believe, I don't want to say all of the wide backs, but I know Kaffe and Tulip Pink both are made from the same gray goods. So they're made from the same weight of fabric. So they feel very similar, which is that sateen finish. But they do feel awfully similar. Like if you just touch this and then touch that, I think the Kaffe wide back would probably be a little bit more smooth, a little more silky, but they're going to be very, very similar. Okay. So, are you guys ready for something that's a little wild and crazy? What we went through so far is, I would say, for the most part, pretty normal. There are the things that people have asked about in the shop, definitely online. Have you ever considered, if you're going to bring texture into something, now this is going to be the kind of the bonus one. Have you ever considered putting a Cuddle or a Minky in your block? Right? Have you thought of that? If you want texture, I'll give you texture. So this is going to be kind of the bonus one. I'll give you some sewing tips in case you ever want to go this route. It was really fun, and we've done, oh gosh, back in the day, we did do a quilt that had Cuddle actually in the blocks here. Now, Cuddle, if you're not familiar, let me move the block and I'll show you kind of what it is. If you're not familiar with Cuddle, Cuddle is a brand name of Minky. So what a Minky product is you are going to have, it's a polyester knit fabric. So now we're completely out of the realm of quilting cotton, but don't be afraid to mix them together. So in this case, you can see the back side is a smooth knit, and on the other side is a plush pile. Now, they have all different lengths of pile here. This one is kind of the OG. It's got a very modest pile. They have Quilting Cuddle, which has even less fluff, less pile to it. And then they've got Luxe Cuddle, which has even more. Like think plush animals, like beards, if you're making like a stuffed dog or something, all the way up to that, some really long pile. But this one is just the regular OG Cuddle. It comes in 60-inch and 90-inch weights. People use it all the time to back a quilt, but you can also use it on the front of the quilt. So, like I said, now we're talking a polyester product. So this one is going to take a little bit of extra loving, maybe we'll call it. Now, if you haven't worked with Cuddle, let's talk about that really quickly for a second here. When you cut it, what I would recommend is a couple of things. So this is going to be a polyester. It's not going to shrink, so I would not recommend pre-washing this at all. But when you're cutting Cuddle into pieces, or even just cutting down yardage, flip it over so the pile side is on the bottom. And then you would just use a very, very, very sharp rotary blade to cut it. The sharper the blade, the less heartburn you're going to have, the less fluff, the less icky stuff. And you don't necessarily want to press too hard, and because you could get some of that pile stuck into your cutting mat. If that happens, not to worry. Just take one of those white, I think it's called like a poly eraser. It's just one of those white rectangle ones. Use that on your cutting mat. Fluff is gone. You can also, when you use Cuddle, this guy's going to be your best friend. You can see it was already my best friend. This is going to be a lint roller. And so you can use that to pick up all the little pieces of fluff. But as you cut your fabric, this is already pre-shrunk. So if you have a lot of fluff that you want to get rid of, you can throw these in a dryer with no heat or very, very low heat, and maybe like just a slightly damp washcloth. And what that is going to do is it's going to maybe attract all of the fluff That's from when you cut it. And then it's also going to save it in your lint trap of your dryer. So be sure to clean that out when you're done too. So cut your pieces. If you're cutting them for placement in a quilt, you could also consider, and I would highly recommend, cutting them just a little bit larger than you want them to, maybe like 1/8 of an inch larger. You can always trim it down. But that way you will be sure to have the pieces size that you need. Cuddle also slips a little bit. So pin, 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 pin. No matter what you're sewing with Cuddle, be sure to pin. The other thing is I sewed these two pieces together as kind of just a start of a block. Another thing that you could consider doing is trimming down or grading your seam allowance here. Now, I would never trim down the 1/4 inch seam allowance on the cotton side, but I certainly would take my scissors, my very sharp scissors at this very weird angle, and you could trim down your seam allowance of your Cuddle to do a couple of things. It can get that bulk out of the way, but if you did cut your piece larger than you actually needed to have some wiggle room, you're cutting that away. So you can see here, as I trimmed away that seam allowance, it's quite a bit shorter than that 1/4 inch. This fabric, this Cuddle, is not going to fray, so you're going to be just fine there. Just be really careful not to snip your seams. And with that, you can just put it together in a block like this and have a wonderfully fluffy and lovely, very interesting, very texture-filled quilt right on the front. So Cuddle, it's not just for the back anymore. And Cuddle people, Shannon, if you're listening, feel free, you can use that catchphrase. So when you are stitching with Cuddle, if you want to make something like this one, it's bulkier. So you know what I'm going to say next. Up your stitch length a little bit. 2.5, 3, even maybe 3.5, depending on how far you have to go, wouldn't be too big for something like this. When you sew, you also want to sew with your cotton on the top and your Cuddle on the bottom. Because you've got such a disparity in bulk here, having your feed dogs help that Cuddle through just helps it even more. And to that end, this is where you might want to bring up your walking foot, if you have one, is to help you from the top and the bottom. Oh, you got to see the back of that thing. So your walking foot would also help you out there. So this might be not for the everyday quilt, but if it gives you an idea, if you have maybe that quilt, that baby quilt, or a Christmas quilt, I think would look fabulous, a nice holiday one with just something a little extra special, maybe the metallic, maybe the Cuddle. I hope you give it a try. And you could always refer back to this video to get those tips on whichever one you try. So one little housekeeping thing, and then I think we will bid you adieu. And that is our thread talks. Our May thread talks is tomorrow. Boy, this year is flying by so fast. We have Maritza Soto, who will be talking about the history of improv quilts, all the way through the ages, how improv quilting kind of became to be the big names in it. And really, it's not just a modern invention. So we're looking very forward to hearing Maritza's talk on improv throughout the ages, and also seeing some beautiful pictures that she is going to provide. So be sure to sign up. That is tomorrow. It is virtual. So if you haven't attended one of our thread talks before, we've got a whole series. We launched the 2026 season. And so you can sign up for any of those, all of those. And don't forget that Club Gotham members get access for free. So do consider that. If you want to try any of these fabrics, whether it is the Windham Artisan Cotton, the Moda Crossweave, the lurex, I think it's Metallic Manor is what it's called, if you want the super shiny one. Anything in between, we've got these available on our website. That's gothamquilts.com. Feel free to check us out and browse the fabric options that we've got. But those, the space dye, that one is one of my favorites. I'm not supposed to choose favorites, but that is one of my favorites. And we also have yards and yards and yards of Cuddle if you want to try that in the front of your quilt. So I think we've had a packed show today. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin soon, but we really hope to see you next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel. That is Tuesdays at 6:30. That's live with Gotham Quilts. Or if you are watching us on the replay, thanks, and we'll see you next time. Until then.